Meeting to order. Judy, roll call, please.
Barry Bailey.
Here.
John Dooley.
Here.
Deborah Potter.
Here.
Kevin Whipple.
Here.
Bill Ernstis.
Present. Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda? There's one thing to add to it, and it'll go in right after the Steve Lowe property. It'll be a report from Don Tribbett that Mr. Dooley will be reading for us. Any other changes or corrections? If not, I'll accept the motion to accept.
I don't see the Steve Lowe property on here.
I added that, and I forgot to send out the new ones. Anyway, he'll be right after Paul Schaefer.
Okay.
Hey, advise him to send them out. That's okay. Okay, other than that, any other changes or corrections?
Move to approve with that amendment, with that change.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Did everybody have a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting? Anybody seen changes or corrections?
I make a motion we accept the minutes I've submitted.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I've got a set here for you to sign afterwards. Okay. Non-financial report.
The financial report for the Greensburg Municipal Airport. We have the three separate accounts. In the 815 account, the airport improvement account, balance $235,560.48. In aviation rotary fuel account, $81,860.30. In airport operations account, $402,464,000.16. The total of all three accounts combined, $719,884.94.
Mr. Schaefer, would you like to update us on construction?
Yeah. Now we've got a few items here that'll require a little discussion. The first one's not too terribly difficult. It's a motion to get basically AIP 19. There's a partial pay request 1, and this is basically to reimburse you for paving and lighting design fees that were issued at this grant was issued at the end of fiscal year 2021, and it is 100% federally funded. So that's $161,866, and those are fees you've already incurred. So this is just to get your money back from FA.
Let's get your money back from the FAA.
Right.
Okay.
I make a motion we acknowledge the submission of AIP 19 in the amount of $161,866, which is 100% federally funded.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. The next item, we've been talking about this change order the last couple of months, and we finally have gotten through all the negotiations and also 2 different surveys. They conducted a survey, and we've conducted a survey. So where we're at is this would be change order number 2 for HIS constructors, and what this is for was the winterization, which is basically preparing the entire site to have this temporary seeded in most areas, it's mulched in some areas, and so that's a big portion of that bill. And then basically with the rain events, we had a lot of material moving around the site due to weather, that unfortunately the erosion control methods that were all approved by IDEM just didn't work. And so they were unusually large storm events, moved things around. So it appears we're going to be kind of working some of that soil twice. So there's some additional moving of material that basically by the contract we're really kind of bound to compensate for because of the unusual weather events. So I apologize, the copy on this, I printed it at a hotel yesterday and it came out kind of weird. Some of them are upside down, so I must have checked the wrong box. But in any case, you'll see in there, we've got some additional excavation, which is 20,655 yards. Now that excavation sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of the thing, we have 450,000 cubic yards we're moving, so 20,000 is a very small percentage when you factor it over. It's a good number for a larger job. And then the borrow excavation, you'll see there's some additional 36,337. So that, you know, again, in comparison to 400,000 yards, we're 60,000 yards, or about 15% of the material is being reworked or having to be hauled in. Of the 36,000, we are already planning on 20, so really it's an increase of 16. So we did end up also doing that temporary mulching, and then we are going to subtract some seed out because now, because of the delay, we are close enough to when O'Mara contractors on the next phase will be starting. We're not going to have them re-temporary seed, so, or even permanent seed. So we're going to subtract that out. So that's a $62,000 savings, which did offset the temporary mulch and winterization of the 56,000 there. But when you add up all these, the under drain outlet protectors, there were 2 added to the job. We had some in there. This was the unit price. It's just we're adding 2 because these were 2 fill tiles that were encountered that outlet into the side of the ponds that we want to make sure they're well protected with a concrete pad around them so they don't accidentally get crushed during future mowing operations. So this, you know, this is a large number for me, but in perspective, you know, in the perspective of the entire project, it's 13%, 13.19%, which, you know, is not unusual in a construction project to have some changes to that degree. We have, this does not exceed your amendment amount. The FAA allows a 15% amendment to the total grant amount. So this is 13% of construction. It's not the total grant. It's about 12% of the grant amount. So we still have 3% in reserve. We're close enough to the end now, and we really went back and forth on the survey quite a bit to where I can't imagine that we're gonna have any other big surprises by the end. So the good news is we're not exceeding that contingency fund. They call it an amendment amount, but basically we're not allowed to have contingencies on other projects. You'll see they'll put a 10 or 15 or 20% contingency in there for things like this, for unforeseen items. But the way the FAA does it is an amendment amount. And that's why in your grant offer, they say you're eligible for a 15% grant amendment for unforeseen conditions. So this is where this will go. If you so choose to approve this tonight, then we will take it to the FAA and discuss and make sure that they're on board with it. The timing of these funds gets a little interesting too on exactly when this money would arrive. So we need to figure that out as well, but that would be the next step. So we would get your approval on it, then go to the FAA. If the FAA approves it, then HIS would do this work. If you don't sign off on it, or the FAA doesn't sign off on it, then we'll just have to stop them early and then figure out how to basically work this into the grade and drain, or the paving and lighting phase down the road. But because we don't have these unit items, we don't have these pay items in paving and lighting, I don't think we would get as favorable of a cost. The $4.50 for Common excavation is a very good price, and even the $13 for the borrow is a pretty good price compared to, I believe, what Dave O'Meara would offer us in a change order to their contract right now. So I think this is about the best deal we can get for the work that still needs to be done under this first phase. So we're recommending that the board proceeds with this. There were several, I won't bore you with the negotiations, but there were several rounds of negotiations, and that's why it took us quite a while. We entered the project in November. We just reached an agreement. And actually, we don't have the signed documents back from HIS yet either, where they had an unfortunate job site accident this past week. And not on our site.
No.
Right, on a different site, yeah, that's kind of taken up some of their time. So their executive level staff has been a little, rightfully so, occupied with other things this week. So they have not signed this, but assuming we're pretty sure they'll be agreeable because we've already kind of went through the numbers. They're just kind of not available this week.
I got a question, and
Yeah.
it's just something I guess I'm not familiar with. But when we took their bid to do this,
Yeah.
they gave us X number of dollars, okay?
Right.
And I understand this change orders because of weather and things like that. When they bid something like that, is it normal for them to bid average conditions, or do they put in their worst case scenario like we unfortunately have had?
Right. Yeah, so they bid on unit pricing, and the unit price is basically based off of how many units of material they're gonna move.
Right.
On weather days, so we also have contractual weather days. So on this, I can kind of tell you how many days they're adding.
I saw that was like 30 days in the end, I think was what we're gonna add.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically, that's just a pro rata share of the financial portion of the project. Or another way to look at it is it's 13% of their original days, because the value of this is 13% of the overall financial. So it's just a pro rata share. So how those days are calculated is based off of an NDOT specification on weather. And the weather, so we factor in 5% of those days are rain days. If it exceeds 5% of those days, then they're owed a day. And so that's factored into the math on how you get to the 30-some days in there.
Okay.
So they bid it with basically being able to work all of that time minus 5% of the days. And so we factor that in the math. And then on the units are the units. So it's always, if we used under the units, we would only pay them for what we moved. But if we use over the units, which is what we're saying we're gonna do on the dirt, then we just pay for whatever we're moving. And that's the reason we did 2 surveys. So there's a combination of, the first survey was an aerial survey from airplanes. So there could be, on that large of a site, 150-acre site, there could be a 5% error just in the tolerances of that from what we shot in the ground. So there's some room for there. The other thing too, soil conditions, when we take the geotech report, we factor in a shrinkage factor. Sometimes, depending on how wet or dry a soil is, it shrinks and swells differently. So in the end, the calculation on how much you need volume-wise changes slightly. And it's not uncommon for that to vary 10 to 5% with moisture. So there's 2 factors that are just kind of variables that are very, one is survey accuracy, one is moisture content of swelling and shrinking of soils. And then the third issue that you got on materials would be just erosion, when if these things go down the waterways, and that's the whole reason we're supposed to put all the rock check dams and the silt fence and have the seed. Unfortunately, sometimes that can be lost, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal for farmers. It's a big deal to try to keep that from happening. but, you know, anywhere from 3 to 5% on a site this large is not uncommon either. So you factor those three things in, and we're definitely, you know, well within the realm of possibility. It's not unreasonable, but, yeah, so they bid it based on units, they bid it based on a number of days, and unfortunately, we just had an unseasonal, you know, condition.
Based on averages, and the averages didn't pan out here. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is that what, that's the reason, maybe the biggest reason?
Right, yeah, the days were calculated based on how many yards of dirt, you know, an average contractor can move per day, and then put that in there, and then, you know, by NDOT's rules, 5% of those days, you should add 5% for cushion as long as you don't go over the 5%, then you're good. But if you do, then you owe them days, and that's, it's a pretty typical way NDOT highway does it, and that's why we do it the same way on our aviation projects, because there's a lot more volume of NDOT highway work that these contractors do, so it saves us from having to argue different processes there.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification. I was just trying to kind of get in my own mind how this occurred and why it occurred and why we had to negotiate. Okay, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think if we would have had drier conditions and, you know, ideal, you know, we could have had a savings, possibly, right? it's you win some, you lose some. So unfortunately, Greensburg, this project always seems to lose some, right? we need some luck. Well, I'm very hopeful that we'll get the rest of our money to finish paving and lighting this year, and we'll be wrapped up and we can stop messing with the runway. We'll be hopefully open soon.
Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Yeah, but sure, great questions. And even before you consider that motion, I will talk on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. This might factor into your decision on that, because from a cash flow standpoint, you might be thinking, well, we're struggling even to get the FAA to commit funds to the next phase. Now we're going to ask them for another $500,000. How is the FAA going to come up with that money? So that, and that's a very good point. This bipartisan infrastructure bill was passed, and you know, your share of that's the $159,000 per year, which is the spreadsheet that I passed out. And what we think, based on our discussions with FAA and NDOT, as you don't have to do this. You could completely do a standalone project that has nothing to do with the runway. And that's actually the original intent of the bill. So, I mean, obviously you're gonna need some apron upgrades, you know, after the runway's done, some geometric widening so we can get larger planes through there. The terminal obviously will be something that you'll wanna be investing some money in the future. So all those things are great projects, and they would be kind of next down the road, along with maybe a parallel taxiway. All these things that are on the airport layout plan that you could look towards possibly using that money and advancing them. However, to show that we're good team players, and to show that you're serious about completing the runway as fast as we can, I think it's smart to commit every bill dollar that you get towards the runway until it's done. We need to send a message to the FAA that that is your #1 priority and nothing else right now. So I have went ahead and generated the spreadsheet with that, and basically called it runway 118 bridge construction shortfall. So the bill fund could go to fund the change order. It could also go fund paving and lighting, the $2.5 million we need beyond the supplemental that we have gotten last year, that they actually haven't written a grant, but they say it's coming for the $3.1 million that we got. So what we need to finish the project out is going to be funding this change order and $2.5 million in discretionary this year. This is a total, let's see, what's the total? $795,000 on your bill. So this will fund the change order plus knock that 2.5 down to 2.225, and help the FAA out a little bit on that discretionary ask. So that's what we don't want to make these motions together, but I thought that would be an important point that you're already you're gonna show the FAA that you're gonna commit the $795,000 over the next 5 years is gonna go back to the construction portion of the runway. So, and if by chance they give us $2.5 million this year, we still need to pay off the land, and the state's planning to give us state apportionment money. But in the event we get all the construction funded and we still have bipartisan infrastructure funds available, then we'll roll it into land reimbursement to get all your financing paid off. So I think that's where we're at. So any further questions on change order?
Long story short, you think it's necessary and recommended and usual. Nothing unusual about this. So that being the case, I would make a motion we approve this change order number 2 as listed here at $560,333.92.
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, everybody in favor say aye.
Aye.
Pass.
Okay, and then the third motion, we kind of discussed this a little bit, but I'm proposing, we need to submit this revised capital improvement plan per NDOT and FAA's request by the end of the day tomorrow. They only gave us 2 weeks notice on this, so some boards didn't even get to meet before we have to turn it in, so at least we get to discuss this. But I think in your case, I'm recommending that you put it all towards the runway as a show of good faith to the FAA that we are serious about completing the runway this year.
Now, if we do this though, and we don't need it, we can still use it for the other items?
Yes.
Or do we have to resubmit again?
No, as a matter of fact, that's a good point, Kevin. This is kind of a placeholder right now. The applications, we don't even know when the applications will be due for the normal bill funds. And there's another part on this. So yeah, on the normal bill funds, which is the 159 you see listed there. So and there's a 5% match on that, 5% state. So that's 176,000 total each year. If we use year 1, year 2 on runway, but then years 3, 4, 5 are still available, we can repurpose it. We're going to have to resubmit this every year, and you can't draw future dollars in advance, but you could roll these as well and collect them at the end, or if by chance your projects change in year 2, you can also repurpose it. And this is unlike non-primary entitlements. These dollars will not go into discretionary for normal FAA, so nobody can use these dollars but you. It's either your airport uses it, and what will happen is at the end of the program, if there are any unused, because it takes 5 years for these funds to expire, at the end of the 5-year period on the expiration, then they'll start converting them into other funding sources for FAA. But until that happens, it's set aside for you and only you can use it. And then you'll see there's 2 other columns besides and this kind of corresponds with the explanation in the first bullet point in the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's $15 billion for infrastructure. That $15 billion is that first red column from the left-hand side, the first red column that says bill allocation funds. And those are allocated to you by formula. So that's how they came up with 159. Then there's 2 other pots. There's $5 billion for airport terminals and $5 billion for air traffic control facilities. You don't have an air traffic control tower, and we don't have traffic counts to justify an air traffic control tower, so you're not eligible for that. But you are, in theory, eligible for terminal funds. And it's a separate pot of money, and it's a separate grant application. Now that grant application, we do know when it's due. It's due March 28th. And we have a terminal on your CIP that was to be, we were asking for type 2 funding, which was the state and local funding. And we also had your terminal apron upgrades on the CIP as well. So what I have done there is we've just taken those CIP numbers and I plugged it in. And I didn't, I plugged it in 2024. And the reason is I didn't want anybody in 2022 or 2023 still being distracted by anything but the runway. But these future years, we went ahead and put in there a terminal apron and strengthening overlay expansion at $1.7 million, and then a terminal with hangar at $2.5 million, which is basically a hangar facility with a transient, business jet size, 100 by 110 or so hangar that you can get a large business jet in. So we put those in there. We can take those out if you don't want them in there, but I figure it's a separate pot of money. It doesn't hurt to ask. It's a relatively simple form that we can submit. It's an online submission, so we can submit that by the 28th. And I wouldn't get your hopes up that we'll get anything, but it certainly doesn't hurt to ask.
So you want a motion to us to revise the CIP accordingly, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, and if there's any other ideas, there's certainly the fire service, water utility design, that's something else that's in your CIP. I don't know that that's eligible as a standalone terminal project, that's why I didn't put it on there. You could use your normal infrastructure, the 159 for that if you wanted to, but again, I thought that might send a mixed message that, that's as important as the runway, and I just thought that wasn't a good idea. So.
Well, after 21 years of phone calls to the FAA, letters to the FAA, meetings with the FAA, numerous environmental studies requested by the FAA, if passing this motion finally shows the FAA that we are serious about this, I make a motion that we revise the CIP and submit to NDOT to include the bipartisan infrastructural law towards the runway.
I second that motion.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Pass.
Okay.
Maybe this will do it. We're serious. We'd like to have a runway.
Yeah, well, this year for discretionary money, it's still looking tight, primarily because the primary airports in the states do have pretty large projects that are competing, but
At least we'll show them we're serious.
yeah, I do know so far, we've had lots of airports that have already gotten calls with discretionary asks saying, you better start thinking about your plan B. We haven't gotten that call here. So that gives us a little bit of hope that they're going to try to get this done. So.
We don't even get the phone call.
All right, thank you all for your time.
Thank
Thank you, Paul.
Okay. Next on the agenda is asking for approval for me to sign the Steve Lowe property documents for the appraisers.
Yeah, that's on, gave everybody a copy of the email from our attorney, Don Trivet. And what he's referring to is on the back, this is a two-sided document, just a copy of an email. And he listed here that he wanted the board to approve the agreements there as he's listed there, and that item number 3 on the back page. He said these agreements need to be approved by the board and signed by you.
Have we seen them?
Yep, I've got, you wanna see it?
But sure don't like to see what I'm approving.
And to be honest with you, I trust you guys so much, that I've already signed it, so now I'm hoping you'll approve it.
Can we pass it around?
Oh, yeah. There's 2 of them. secretary called, and she said, actually, the only thing she needs for me to send back is the last page with my name on it. But I can print them all out anyways, just for safety's sake. When we go to court for Goddard's, Hastings, and Beggs, will all their damages be at that time? Also, is nothing after the court?
I'm definitely not the expert, but my understanding is the court award, the court-appointed appraisers come back, they accept or reject that, and then,
Okay.
I think what Don was saying is he was expecting a settlement offer from their attorney, but that has not happened, so he went ahead and moved to set trial dates. And he's also advising the board of the discovery dates as well, and setting, and so as we move forward, of course, that happened with the Sturchy case as well, and we reached a settlement prior to the trial date. So I think, the court award would be the court award at that point in time, and if the judge rules on it, there's no further damages, but then it can be appealed by a jury trial at a later date if so that's the engineer, I'm not an attorney, but that's my understanding.
Okay. I apologize for grinding the meeting to a halt. I thought that was the appraisal amount on the land, not the agreement with the appraisers. I apologize. So I make a motion, we accept the agreements there with the appraiser and allow them to get moving.
I'll say that.
And the review appraiser, but
All that, all,
Right.
those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
And for clarity, that, if Steve Lowe accepts the offer that at the review appraisal, prepare an offer of just compensation recommendation to the board, and then you'll either decide to go with that offer or not, and then if you make an offer to him, he can accept it, and it wouldn't necessarily go to condemnation. They can accept that and it would be done. If they reject it, then it would go to the condemnation process.
All right, John, you want to read Mr. Tribbett's?
Yeah, and I can either read it word for word. We all have it in front of us here, this email that our attorney, Don Tribbett, sent us. He's asked us in this item number 1 on the front page, kind of the lower part of number 1. Again, Mr. Sturchy's agreed, we were in agreement with him to purchase the additional properties that was deemed to be 5.7 acres after a survey was found that it's a little bit, almost an acre less than that. So he gets less money from that, and that's agreeable. And also asked us to pay $855, just his half of the surveying bill, which Mr. Tribbett recommends in light of Mr. Sturchy's cooperation right there. Said we don't need to write a check, that it'll just be adjusted at the closing of the property. And us accepting that, paying that half is just, he said that needs board approval. I've also noticed $855 is also on our bills, but we don't need to pay that bill because again, it's an item at closing. It's an item at closing, so. But that's the only other action on his email that would require board approval. Again, he asked if this could be read to you, but I just made copies and handed out, where you can read this yourself. Any questions about that? Again, Mr. Sturgey wanted an $855 consideration for his half of the closing fees. He's gonna get less money, about an acre less property. And so his amount will be reduced by $16,000, so.
I make a motion to pay $855 for the survey, because it is.
Saving us quite a bit of money.
Yeah, at closing, yeah,
At closing, yes.
sure. I second that myself.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Pass. Okay.
The rest of the items on there is just updates on the Goddard, Haston, Beggs properties. They're basically, waiting for, they haven't had demands, as you can see what he's listed here, have received demands from those parties. They have trial dates set. Again, those are to be canceled, moved, what have you. But as he's listed here, those properties for Goddard, Haston, and Beggs are all in process. Requires no action from the board.
Mr. Trivett did tell me that Goddard's are talking about letting go with Mr. Severs. Well, that's true or not, I don't know, and Phil had told me the same thing when he and his brother called me, wanting to look at damages on the property, so I haven't heard anything more back about going out and looking at anything, so. All righty. Mr. Scheidler.
Well, everything's doing fine at the airport. We had a little trouble getting the ice off the runway when we had that ice storm. There's just really not much we can do with that until it gets warm enough to melt. So we were closed for a few days during that time. Although I worked at some every day, got off what I could each day. But anyhow, we've had all the hangars are still full. We still got a short waiting list, but we did lose one tenant, and another next one on the list moved in there. So
That's the one with the plane sitting outside.
that's the plane that's sitting outside now for sale.
Is he paying us a tie-down fee?
Yes, he paid 2 months in advance, figuring that if it don't sell by then, he's gonna move it to the grass strip out of Bernie
Okay.
when it gets solid enough to fly it out there. So
Who moved out here?
Everett McIntyre passed away, and this was the plane he had in a hangar out there. So I'm sitting in the corner of the ramp out there now.
When did Everett die?
Oh, early January.
Or did he? Okay.
He'd been ailing for some time, cancer. So.
Okay.
But, so anyhow, one of the guys that got booted out of Batesville was subletting a spot down in Harrison while somebody who was had sold their airplane, was looking for another. He was getting to stay down there, but he was really nervous. As soon as that other guy found an airplane, he was gonna be out again. So he was tickled to be the next one on the list and got moved in, so.
Hey, Paul, with the ice problems, are we gonna have heat coils in the new runways? No, okay. Just wanna try.
Mr. Clerk, we never use any product on there, no salts or sands or anything.
You know, it might be different on the new runway, because I'm guessing that it will have a little bit of fall and will drain. The runway we have has low spots in it, and it holds moisture. And Todd, a few years ago, had COBA come out and spread urea or something on the runway to help melt some ice. And it didn't work well enough that he was able to land here anyhow, but it screwed the runway up for the rest of the winter because there was residue from that urea that settled in all the low spots, and then every time it would snow, that snow would melt there, but then it would freeze into ice. And then I couldn't do nothing with it because the ice was in low spots, and you can't get to it to even try to scrape it out of there. And so we had quite a few days we had to close the runway because there was ice on it. So I told Todd was stuck in Florida, wanting to come home when this last ice storm. He spent an extra 5 days or so down in Florida because I just told him, I said, we can't get it off there. So, and I told him, I said, don't go send your guys out here to spread anything on it either. So, all right.
Sure.
Next, approval of the bills.
see the bills listed, everything on my personal spreadsheet here is just exactly as they've listed. Again, they listed $855 as a payment. Again, that won't be a direct payment. From scratches.
Well,
But
that's
these-
our half, right?
That's our half. Well, we don't need to write a check for that, is what I'm saying. That comes out of the survey. We agreed to pay half the survey. That'll be in consideration at closing. We don't have to write a check for it.
Well, I thought our half was $855 and his half was $855.
It is.
So we have to pay $855.
What?
But
Actually, all of it.
it'll just be at the closing then? Okay.
Yeah, it's all at the closing, yeah.
It'll be paid, it'll be paid closing rather than
A separate check.
Gotcha.
Okay, all right.
Is that's the way I understand it.
Right, yeah, okay.
And we do have Sturgis, I looked on Beacon, it's in the process of being transferred over to, it will show that we own it. So, that's good news. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll accept the motion to pay the bills.
I make a motion, we pay the bills.
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Any comments from the board or the audience? Anybody want to say anything? If not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn the meeting.
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ready to see you next month.